Okay, busuafoɔ so mesa so da mo nyinaa ase de baa yɛ channel yi so de nimdeɛ news na ɛno deɛ ɛyɛ asɛm kɛseɛ na ɛsi wɔ man Ghana hanom ama asɛm kɛseɛ na ɛsi wɔ yɛ man Ghana hanom ebi nsi da first time in history ɛno deɛ indeed yɛate dɛ na ATADWE foɔ ɛne sɛn ɛyɛ first time in history ɛyɛ Ghana the only country in Africa to produce ɛyɛ cholera vaccine. Only Ghana to produce cholera vaccine in Africa. Actually, the whole Africa, say Nigeria, say Malayo, Ghana, and the first country to produce cholera vaccine. African hand, a binsi da, a young wasem kesiye, and a esiwo yemem hanum. Now, young Quensenum there, Ghana has become the first country in Africa to manufacture a cholera vaccine, giving the country to boost as the future vaccine manufacturing on the continent. Like I say, Ghana Hanum no, you have become the first country in Africa to manufacture a cholera vaccine. See, cholera, a woman Ghana Hanuma, indeed, as if me it will be a class now. Even they don't have even serene environment. We are quite be toilet na be kwako sinsun eni nyina na ebempen etim ebasa na a chronic disease the bread to nipa so na say another burden abra, but in collaboration with Dan Adams, NS chemist and Kina farmer in confirming say you can't DEK no. There are 3 collaborators on Mukabuma, Motimi aye cholera vaccine aba on my Muhanma, there in Africa no, Ghana na etimi number 1 country etimi aye the cholera vaccine no, giving the country to boost as the future vaccine manufacturing on the continent. It was produced by the DEK Vaccines Limited, a private sector-led consortium of Ghanaian pharmaceutical companies comprising Dan Adams, NS Chemist and Kina Farmer. Say in Americano, NS Chemist, Kina Farmer and Dan Adams. Go for me and say companies mean say and I'm muti boma to see the motimi ayed cholera vaccine no. We are say after first time in history in Africa, Ghana to become the first country to manufacture the cholera vaccine. Indeed, your boy Humodi Yepa. According to Dr. Kofi Poku, Managing Director of the DEK Vaccines Limited, the cholera vaccine was one of the 6 other vaccines, including vaccines against malaria, HPV, pneumonia, and rotavirus, which would be ready by 2026. Now, according to Dr. Kofi Poku, the managing director of the DEK, Dan Adams, NS Chemist, and Kina Farmer no, on the managing director. Kofi Poku, Dr. Kofi on the da Jumakumi saying now. The cholera vaccine was one of the 6 other vaccines, including vaccines against malaria, HPV, pneumonia, and rotavirus, which would be ready for 2026. Now, the cholera vaccine, it was one of the 6 other vaccines now. But cholera na kind, but by 2026 now them ready. Malaria and HPV, pneumonia, rotavirus, and the African home brain. Did your boy Humodi Yepa. He was speaking to the Ghanaian Times in Accra on Friday on the sidelines of working visit of the Director General of the International Vaccine Institute, Dr. Jerome King, to Ghana. The company, he said, was targeting to produce 600 million doses of the various vaccines annually when the newly installed manufacturing plant operates at its full capacity in about 2 years. Now, Omobota money so they who was said a machine on the to produce over 600 million doses of various vaccines annually. That is Afibiano. We produce about 600 million doses of vaccines annually each year we produce 600 million doses of vaccines. Like I said, a year as a kid year power. Speaking to Ghanaian Time in Accra on Friday on the sidelines of working visit of the Director General of the International Vaccine, you are Dr. Jerome Kim Semkakra Ode Ekotu Ehonu Binum. The company, he said, was targeting to produce 600 million doses. Like it's a year as a company no. So multi target so make produce 600 doses of vaccines. Indeed, a year nigi sem kesiye pa or say Bob Mabasuye pa. Dr. Insia Poku stated that currently the company was working on a typhoid vaccine, which included the completion of all necessary tests and was awaiting the World Health Organization certification for production to commence. Now, according to you, Dr. Insia Poku, or said to Jack currently said the company they were working on a typhoid vaccine. They were working on its vaccine, which included the completion of all necessary tests and was awaiting the World Health Organization's WHO certification for production to commence. Now almost trying to copy say the World Health Organization you can't check who no almost certification for production no ebe started kama. He explained that the company's drive to enhance vaccine manufacturing locally followed a licensing and technology transfer agreement with the IVI, a non-profit international organization for the manufacturing of the vaccines. Now, the agreement is significant for us as it enables drug substance manufacturing capability to be built, that is production of the antigen or raw material needed to manufacture actual vaccines, he added. Or say a year agreement is very, very significant. Like I say, or say it enables drug substance manufacturing capability to build. Like I say, drug substance, its capability to stand, it builds it. That is production of the antigen, the antigen, or the raw material needed for the manufacture actual vaccines. The production of vaccines locally, Dr. Insiapuku explained, would enable Ghana and the West African sub-region to reduce the critical shortage of vaccines needed to prevent malaria, cholera, cervical cancer, and other fatal diseases. Like I said, ama some critical conditions and we be see in your short vaccines are short see the 8 million way come had ama 8 million export ama in your some why akoso 13 because it will get to a time maybe not your vaccines ama malaria na a shorting betting I export to rainy in some that you can their motive behind all this to reduce the critical shortage of vaccines needed to prevent malaria, cholera, cervical cancer, and other fatal diseases. Next, some time say, ama other fatal diseases the two are still crown. And you say, a do a short tintina and the intimate to us and no more what they say, they will do all their possible means to do away with all of diseases. Dr. Kim said the transfer of vaccine manufacturing technology to Ghana was critical in ensuring that the country and Africa in general was able to produce its own vaccines and as well as adequately respond to the future pandemics. Now, the vein he stated was focused on improving access to life-saving technologies to meet the ambitious goal of enabling Africa manufacture 60% of vaccines it needs against some diseases. Like I said, it will provide an ambitious goal to manufacture 60% of vaccines it needs against some diseases. This is in support of the commitment and other African countries dependent on its own vaccines when faced with another pandemic. Dr. Kim also added it. He commended at Ghana for putting in place the necessary structures, including laboratory and field testing for effective regulation of vaccine manufacturing to ensure quality. Like I say, for in some kakra a war a whole. They say the ATADWE yasan at the BM. Ghana has become the first African country in Africa to produce cholera vaccine. Like I say, Ghana di pan ara. Ghana, Ghana hanum. and the first African country to produce first cholera vaccine. It means that you set record. I say then your boy a basso, you say a boy a basso indeed, your boy who would you pam. Tifo, when you say Kaka, Makama painting watching, a Ghana Sadian, you have become the first country to produce cholera vaccine in Africa. It's for the Munamasi, aha, a